What if the ground beneath a school was hiding the truth the state refused to acknowledge? In the summer of 2012, a team of forensic scientists walked onto an abandoned stretch of land in Marianna, Florida. The state said nothing was there. No cemetery, no bodies, no reason to dig. But the men standing there had listened to the same story for 40 years, told by different boys in different cities who had never met each other. They all said the same thing. They buried kids behind the school.
USF researchers say they have discovered almost 20 graves not previously known about by the state of Florida at the Dozier School for Boys. The state reform school closed after multiple adult men came forward saying they were badly abused while students there. Our Carson Chambers joins us now after speaking with one family who wants to bring their loved ones home. This is heartbreaking, Carson.
It is, Brendan. 83-year-old Richard Varnado was just a kid when his brother was taken to the Dozier School for Boys on a trespassing charge. A month later, his brother was dead, and his family never got to give him a proper burial.
What they were talking about was the Florida School for Boys, also known as the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys, a state-run reform school that operated in Marianna from 1900 until it was closed in 2011. Designed to be a place to correct delinquent youth, it became one of the most notorious institutions in American history, a place where cruelty and neglect were so deeply woven into its operations that it left behind a legacy of death, secrecy, and decades-long unanswered questions.
This was a very, very poor family. As you can tell, none of the children are wearing shoes. They're all barefooted.
The little blonde boy in the front is Richard Varnado's brother. It's the only photograph he has.
This was Thomas Jr.
Thomas was just 3 years old here and just a little older, 13, when a neighbor accused him of stealing a typewriter. One of thousands of children remanded to the Dozier School for Boys in the Panhandle. A state reform school closed last year amid reports of severe beatings, torture, and deaths.
He was out there when they picked him up.
38 days after Thomas went to Dozier, he was dead. His family got a letter a week after his funeral.
Personally, I don't believe a word of it.
His death certificate reads pneumonia, that he was buried on school property, but his remains were never counted among the 31 marked graves known as Boot Hill Cemetery.
The school housed boys from all over Florida. Many were sent there for what today would seem like minor infractions, truancy, running away from home, or simply being labeled incorrigible. Once inside, the state's stated mission of rehabilitation gave way to something much darker. Reports of severe physical beatings, psychological abuse, and systemic neglect were widespread. Some former students, who later called themselves the White House Boys after a small building on campus where they say the worst beatings occurred, described punishments that decades later felt more like torture than discipline.
Now USF researchers are revealing there are many more graves at Dozier, at least 19 more so far that have gone suspiciously unmarked.
The black and red rectangles mark the areas where we believe there are burial shafts.
These accounts weren't isolated anecdotes. Over the decades, independent inspections and investigations pieced together a record of horrific conditions. Overcrowded dormitories with leaky roofs and no heating, bucket toilets in place of plumbing, children left alone at night, and punishments involving repeated whippings with straps or paddles. By the time the school finally failed a state inspection in 2009, concerns about abuse and violence had become impossible to ignore. Yet beneath the surface, something even more troubling was taking shape, something the official records barely acknowledged. For years, families were told that children who died at the school were either buried in marked graves or had run away. But former students and researchers began to suspect something very different, that children who died, whether from diseases, accidents, escape attempts gone wrong, or even from the effects of abuse, were buried quietly on unmarked graves on the school grounds, with little to no documentation and no respect.
School records show as many as 81 boys died at Dozier. USF researchers believe as many as 98 children lost their lives here, including Thomas Varnado Jr.
All I heard was "get up," stand in that corner. When I got up off the bed, it seemed like I was so heavy behind, but I was afraid to reach behind me for fear that all I would bring out from behind me was flesh and blood.
I got over 100 lashes with a strap from the small of my back to the breaks of my knees. I passed out. What woke me up is I started choking on my blood because my mouth was torn to pieces.
The evil that is still in those walls is palpable. You can feel it. You can hear it. You can sense it.
In 2010, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement was ordered to investigate after claims surfaced about dozens of unmarked graves. Early reports identified 31 burial sites, but investigators believed that number was only the beginning. Interest in the mystery peaked when the University of South Florida was granted permission to conduct a full forensic survey of the land in 2012. Led by forensic anthropologist Dr. Aaron Kimmerly, the team set out to uncover what had truly happened over more than a century. Using ground-penetrating radar and careful archaeological methods, the USF team began uncovering remains, dozens more than anyone had expected. Over 4 years of excavation and analysis revealed at least 55 burial sites on school property, many of them outside the official cemetery. By the time 2016 rolled around, they had documented nearly 100 deaths connected to the school between 1900 and 1973, far more than the records had ever shown. 7 bodies were positively identified through DNA matches, and dozens more were matched presumptively through contextual evidence. These discoveries answered one question: yes, the stories of unmarked graves were real. But why so many children ended up there was a far more complicated truth. The causes of death varied: infectious diseases like influenza and pneumonia, accidents like fires or drownings, and cases where blunt force trauma was evident on the remains. In some instances, it was clear that conditions like malnutrition, lack of dental care, and negligent medical treatment played a role. At least one set of remains showed signs of a possible shotgun wound. In many other cases, poor documentation and the passage of time meant that the exact cause of death would never be known. Perhaps even more harrowing were the testimonies of survivors who spoke of punishments that went far beyond discipline. Some described being beaten unconscious while chained to walls or beds. Others recounted sexual assaults in secluded parts of the facility, and some alleged they saw classmates simply disappear, sent to work details and never heard from again. One survivor recalled seeing a boy who had been beaten die in a bathtub. Another spoke of bodies burned in barrels. While many of these individual claims were impossible to verify decades later, they painted a chilling picture of life inside Dozier's walls. The racial dynamics of the school added another layer of injustice. The segregated South of the early 20th century meant that black students were disproportionately subjected to harsher treatment and were 3 times more likely to die and be buried on site than white students, according to the forensic team's findings. This disparity reflected broader societal inequalities of the Jim Crow era, where black children institutionalized in state facilities often received far worse conditions and far less attention from officials and the public alike.
Ramel Ross's film Nickel Boys received 2 Oscar nominations this year. The movie is an adaptation of a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. It follows the experiences of 2 African-American boys at the fictitious Nickel Academy in Marianna, Florida. The boys experience horrific physical and sexual abuse at the school. That work of fiction is directly inspired by what happened to real children in Florida's Panhandle. This building, dubbed the White House by survivors, is the main location where children at the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys were beaten, abused, and even killed. Over 100 children died here at Dozier. Since 2012, dozens of bodies have been recovered, mostly in unmarked graves. This is the true story of the White House boys, and how the survivors of Dozier fought for years with the state of Florida for reparations and recognition. Dozier went by several different names in its history. It was the Florida State Reform School when it first opened in 1900. A second campus opened 5 decades later. By then, it was the Florida School for Boys. Children were originally sent there for criminal offenses like theft and murder. But eventually, kids were sent there for things like disobeying their parents, skipping school. Even being an orphan or ward of the state could land a child at Dozier. It soon became the largest reform school in the country.
When we got there, I felt we were in a place that was like heaven.
Charles Fudge was 10 years old when he and his brother got sent to what was then the Florida School for Boys for smoking and skipping school.
We ended up there, and I thought, wow, this is going to be great to have a place to be to where we would be safe and not be in any trouble. That didn't last very long for my thoughts of the place, because on the third day that I was there in 1960, I was taken down to what was called the White House and was given 31 licks with a leather strap that was just so horrifying to have been beaten like that.
Despite the horrors these investigations uncovered, criminal prosecutions were unlikely. Most of the staff implicated in the worst abuses had long since died, and statutes of limitations prevented charges for decades-old crimes. Instead, the focus shifted towards remembrance, healing, and accountability of a different kind. In 2017, the Florida legislature passed a resolution formally apologizing to survivors and families of victims. More recently, legislation has been signed to provide financial restitution and support to those who endured the school's abuses, a recognition that while justice in a courtroom may be impossible, acknowledgement and recompense still matter.
Yes, look at me. I've been sexually molested by state employees. That's hard to say for a man my age. I'm almost 80. 4 children, 15 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. Yes, it's difficult to talk about, but if I don't talk about it, who will?
The campus, like most public places in the South at the time, were segregated by race. A road ran through the middle, marking the boundary. Both sides had their own church, dormitories, dining halls. That segregation was enforced with violence.
If a white boy spoke to a black boy, that was an automatic go down to the White House for a beating. And that was vice versa. If the black boys attempted to talk to us, they would get the same beating as we did. So we were not allowed to communicate with each other.
The boys were forced to work without pay. This included harvesting crops, manufacturing bricks, and other dangerous jobs for children. When he was 11, Richard Huntley cut sugarcane at Dozier.
In doing so, I accidentally struck my right foot, and severed the top of my toe.
The state of Florida held us like slaves. I went to a field, I worked every day, and I never got paid for it. But I see my country talking to other countries about making their children work for nothing. This happened on American soil, people. This happened in Florida.
This is a story about children who went into state custody, died, and were never given back. Their families weren't given an answer, their remains weren't given back, and that's, why this is so important.
For years, there were the rumors. Kids disappeared in the night. Families informed that their child passed away without explanation. Even less communication, and few bodies ever returned home. At the edge of the campus is an area called Boot Hill. White and black boys were buried there. No markers were placed until the 80s. For decades, it was unclear how many boys died at Dozier, until the survivors and families of the dead began speaking up. In 2009, the then still active Youth Correctional Institution on the former Dozier campus failed a state inspection. Investigative reporting from the St. Petersburg Times also shared the stories of survivors and families of those who died at Dozier. Those factors prompted investigations from the state and federal government, which confirmed the historic and recent allegations of abuse and violence at Dozier. That was just the start of the process to fully uncover the horrors of the reform school. In 2012, the state of Florida granted permission for a forensic anthropological survey led by University of South Florida Associate Professor Erin Kimmerly. Her mission determined how many bodies were buried at Dozier and returned those remains to their families.
We knew that there were crosses there that were put there in the 80s, so they didn't necessarily correspond to graves, but that was kind of a starting point. And so the question was, well, can we figure out how many burials are actually here?
Records were messy and incomplete. The state estimated about 30 unmarked graves on the campus. Kimmerly found that many of the reported deaths were suspicious.
Even at that time, it was highly contested and debated because the black children had been abandoned and found days later. And the state physician said the bodies were piling up.
Through the excavations, Kimmerly's team recovered 55 bodies, 24 more than the state estimated in its report. Her team ran DNA tests to match the children to their living family.
And it's a challenge because they were children, right? So they don't have direct descendants. They themselves never had children. So you're looking for aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, kind of working out laterally. And the reason we want maternal relatives is because when you have remains that are old or have been degraded, what's called degraded DNA, then the type of DNA that we typically get is called mitochondrial DNA, and that's passed on through the maternal side of the family.
The scientists who went to Mariana in 2012 did not come with preconceived answers. What they found was a legacy buried under brush and soil, a story that had been whispered for generations, now rising to the surface. These graves, once ignored or forgotten, have become a testament to the lives of boys who were swept into a system that promised reform and instead delivered brutality, neglect, and death. The forensic team's work continues as they match more remains to names and attempt to return dignity to those lost. And the world listened.
There was the disproportionate number of black boys who died, who were buried at the school, who didn't have death investigations or death certificates issued. Of the bodies recovered, only 8 were positively identified and returned to their relatives. The rest were reburied in either Tallahassee or Mariana.
On behalf of the Florida House of Representatives again, we stand here in solidarity saying we're sorry. And we apologize for the wrongs that happened to you at the Dozier School as well as the Okeechobee School.
In 2017, survivors of Dozier received a formal apology from the Florida House and Senate. From there, they kept going to the legislature for the next 8 years, seeking damages. Each time, they spoke with lawmakers and went to committee meetings to tell their story.
And a man stabbed me in my legs with a railroad spike attached to a pole. Weeks later, they took the kids to Atlanta to a basketball game. And everybody was planning to run and I couldn't run because my leg was busted open.
Can you imagine the screams from a 5-year-old being restrained while getting a monstrous beating from a 6'5", 260-pound man? If it were your child, would you be here? Yes, you know you would. I've been doing this for 16 years. Let me put that in perspective for you. If your child had started the first grade, the first day, the amount of time that I've spent coming to Tallahassee speaking with the governor, working on 2 committees with the Secretary of State, your child would be starting grad school.
We're asked to talk about this over and over and over. It don't stop. I'm 77 years old now. That lives with me daily. I can't help it.
Finally, in 2024, the Florida legislature unanimously passed a $20 million program for survivors to get damages. State Senator Darrell Roussan was one of the lawmakers who sponsored the legislation. He pushed for the funding for about as long as the White House boys had been asking for it.
No amount of money, Madam Chair, is adequate. But at least the voices that we heard today were not just the voices of those who came here, but they're speaking for the missing. They're speaking for those that we can't talk to, but we can pray for.
The application process for the money is still ongoing. The state expected about 500 survivors to take part in the program. So far, more than 1,000 have applied.
The compensation is very slim considering the abuse that we've endured for, well, I'm 77 years old now, and I was 12, so you can figure out how many years that I lived with this, and I still live with it every day. It's not something that one can ever forget.
The money is as close to justice as any survivor will get. Due to the passage of time erasing evidence and the deaths of several potential witnesses, none of the direct perpetrators of the abuse the White House boys experienced were ever charged with a crime. The White House still stands on the former Dozier School for Boys campus, preserved by the state of Florida as a memorial. Next to it are several statues depicting what the boys experienced. A bed and paddle like the one that was used to beat them. A fan that was turned on to help drown out their screams. Several statues of young boys, black and white, standing lined up, waiting their turn. People have left toys, flowers, and pretty rocks at the memorial. Several of the buildings of the former campus, like the dormitories and churches, are crumbling around the White House. On other parts of the campus, buildings are renovated for government purposes. Several schools are located just yards away from the White House.
Most of us guys had decided that if we never got a penny, but people found out the abuse that had taken place, that they may never, ever hear of another child being beaten and abused, some of them raped. If that never happens again in the state of Florida, in the whole United States, then we did something good for little children.
Newspaper tales. No story is too buried. No truth is too deep for us to dig out. If you found this revelation meaningful, subscribe and share so these stories can reach others who believe the truth deserves daylight.